First of all, when you can see that this is in first person. When somebody tells their own story about themselves, how is that different than when like somebody tells the story in third person? Like if I was going to say, "Here's what I did this morning," and I told you everything that I did this morning, and Azaria said, "Here's what Ms. Fox did this morning," how would that be different? If she was telling the story of what I did this morning and she was looking at it as an outsider versus me telling it as an insider, how would that be a different thing?
You would know it better.
Okay, it's one thing. I mean, because it's happening to me. If I'm going to tell my own story, though, what might I do that you probably wouldn't do if you were talking about me?
Make it sound better for yourself.
Why do you think?
So people like you. I don't
Okay. When we tell our own stories, we get to edit out details that we don't want to do, right? If you're gonna like tell a story in the third person, if you're gonna talk about what somebody did or something, you're just probably gonna say what you actually observed. So you have to consider when somebody's telling their own tale, which is what's happening here. Gene is talking to us, right? Through, this is an excerpt of a novel. And so he's telling us how he feels about Finny. And you have to consider when he's telling it himself, there's going to be a what, right, with it. He might not, he might, leave out some details or something. What do you know what we called that in other grades? First person narrator. Did you guys learn that at all? Is anything ringing a bell?
know. A little bit.
Okay, when somebody tells their own story, they might have a bias, right? So we call it in literature reliability. So is the narrator reliable? That's a thing you always have to consider. If someone is telling you something in first person, then you're like, okay, how reliable are they? And they can run the gamut from really reliable to like not reliable at all. And most people, when they tell their stories, are somewhere in the middle, right? So Gene is telling us something really more about him than he is saying about Finny in here. We don't really know very much about Finny in this at all. We know how Gene feels, and that's really squarely what this paragraph is about. So we want to do more than just decode the language. We want to do more than just like, what do these things mean? We want to be like, well, what's the point, right? How do they communicate meaning? And the best way to know how to do that is to really do lids, because that's your toolbox. That's just the toolbox that you have, right? If I'm really going to do more than just decode the language, I really have to take it apart a little bit and look at it more critically, because there's more probably going on under the surface. These things that we started talking about the other day are about lids. Absolutes are word choice, right? It's diction of no one, right? Everyone, always, never. I mean, it's like the word choice. Rhetorical questions are going to be under syntax. Declarative statements or just assertions, that's a syntactical move or syntactical choice. Somebody's just using a declaration, right? So that's part of lids. Repetition goes under syntax as well, because you're repeating something. Contrast can go under diction, right? Or details can be contrasted. Lists, if you're going to make a list, you're being specific, and usually details help make up a list. So these things, I'm still talking about lids. I'm just maybe calling them and grouping them in kind of like some different kind of way. So these things help to communicate emotion. So we can like really figure it out how it is that we should read this. So if I was a first time reader and I'm a good critical reader, I have to do what I would, I would have to do what I would advise all the students to do, which is like, you can't really bring all your background knowledge to this and superimpose it on. So you might think Gene's talking about his best friend, right? I have a best friend. I like my best friend. I would talk nicely about my best friend. You have to kind of like throw all that out the window. You can't just think like it's got to be like what I would expect it to be. Not that it's not going to be what you expect it to be. You just have to look and see what the words are going to lead you to. Like for instance, if it says read this eulogy, what strategies is someone using to make meaning, right? So you have an idea of what you think is in a eulogy. praising for the dead, but you'd have to read really to see if that's actually happening. Right? If there's a commencement speech, it's like, what am I expecting from a commencement speech? I'm expecting something to inspire. Maybe that'll happen, and maybe it won't happen. Right? You have to kind of read more closely to see. So we're going to have to read closely to figure out how Finny really thinks. Gene really thinks. So one of the things that I would notice right away right from the start, it was clear no one had ever been better adapted to a sport than Finny was to blitzball. If I'm taking it sentence by sentence, which is the easiest thing to do, right? So I'm still kind of scaffolding a little bit, taking it sentence by sentence. I'm going to look for the most obvious things first. To me, it would be this, right? It's the absolute of no one. And that's because absolutes are hardly ever true, right? So it's like, no one had ever been better adapted to a sport than Finny was to blitzball. That tells you something about Gene. And the way that he does it, right away, right from the start. I mean, he doesn't have any wondering about it. He doesn't be like, well, it was like this, people, let me tell you. Or I think it was. He doesn't soften it, right, in any way. He goes right from the start. So you get that declaration. That tells me something. My ears are perked up, right? And then, this really is what does it though, because you have a simple declarative sentence where it's kind of saying the same thing. In fact, the word right is repeated. So here's what I'm wondering. Why do you need to repeat that? Right? If I'm reading this right from the start, it was clear that no one had ever been better adapted to a sport than Finny was to blitzball. I saw that right away. I mean, it's not like, Finny is the president of the United States or anything. I mean, it's like he just invented a game. So, I mean, it's why is it so important that it bears repeating? So that's a question I would have, okay? Then, right away, he goes into a rhetorical question and then another rhetorical question. Why not? He'd made it up. Hadn't he? As though he's having a conversation with himself, because I'm not having a conversation with him, and neither are you. So right there, you should have some questions, and right here, you should be kind of now swimming in the shallow end, right, of the pool, right? You got your feet wet, and you're like, something is going on, right? Why not? He'd made it up, hadn't he? No one has a problem with this, Gene. What's going on? That seems to be too much, right? What are you trying to do there? Are you rationalizing something or what, right? He says it needn't be surprising that he was sensationally good at it. And I think we talked about this last time. Sensationally is contrasted with what? Bumblers. Good. So that's the contrasting diction. What is the power position in a debate or an argument or in talking really about anything, or even in your own essay? Because you can't talk about two things at the same time, right? Something comes first and something comes second. Where's the power position? First or second? To get the first word in or the last word? Both are important, but which is the most important? Do you know why?
Because it's what they're remembering.
Right. If you're going to get in an argument with your mom, don't you want the last word, right? I mean, you probably never get the last word, but don't you want that, right? Okay, so notice how it would be different if he said, we were bumblers in our own way, but Finny was just sensationally good at it, versus Finny's sensationally good at it, and the rest of us are bumblers in our own way. And you're like, that's what you're left with, that idea that we suck, right? And it's like, what is that? What's your issue, Gene? You've got some kind of, you have an issue. You've got to have some kind of an issue if you're going to cut yourself down that much. Okay, I suppose it served us right for letting him do all the planning. So what are some words that you see here in this sentence that I should mark because they're going to tell you about attitude? I see one very clearly.
Surface phrase.
That's one. That phrase, but maybe what's another word that's that would indicate something about his attitude? It's not planning. We let him, right? We let him do all the planning. So that kind of goes along with that. Why not? He'd made it up, hadn't he? I mean, we let him do all the planning. Are you trying to rationalize something? Think about the attitude that you would have if you're trying to rationalize something. And then he says this thing, which I think is super important, and that's why I like to put it in black. I didn't really think about it at all. Why is that important? Or I think about it myself.
Because he obviously did.
Right. This is where I'm kind of laughing at him a little bit, right? I've already had these questions, but I'm kind of laughing because it's like when you say that you didn't think about it at all, and everything here is about Finny at Blitzball, and that's great. Everything here is Finny is Blitzball, and that's great. And this whole paragraph, which is 9 lines, tells me how wonderful that he is, and you keep saying it, and then you say that you didn't really think about it. I don't believe you. Right? So that speaks to the reliability. How do I know? Because that's it. I mean, I'm reading the text. It's not the inflection of my reading it. Right? I could read this in any kind of way. Right? So it's not about that. It's about like the print as it lays there. You have to know that saying this when you know logically that he is actually thinking about it tells you something is a problem. Right? You shouldn't believe him. And so when he asks a rhetorical question, what difference does it make? People ask that because, it doesn't make a difference. I mean, that's the obvious answer. What difference does it make, right? If they're going to say something to you, the obvious thing is like, well, duh, it doesn't make any difference at all. So when he says that, that looks like what is intended, right? But he goes on to say, for that it was just a game. Why am I putting this in black? Like I put this other one.
He's saying that it wasn't important, but it obviously wasn't to him.
So is it just a game?
Not to him.
Not to him. There you go. So when he says it was just a game, you're like, whatever. You want it to be just a game, but it's really not just a game. Like, you got a lot of stock in this dude, right? It was good that Finny could, and then you have your image there, right? Your image of shine, because that's not a fact. So, and it's not word choice, not diction, right? It's certainly not understanding. It's an image. Why? Because the sun shines, right? Lights shine, electricity. I mean, he's a person, so he doesn't literally shine. But we say people shine when we're trying to compliment them, right? Oh, you really shone at that. Way to shine. That was great, right? So he does say it's very good to shine at it, but he doesn't let it go, right? He could. And you get the repetition, shine, and many other things. Now, stopping. What is the paragraph about again?
Blitzball.
Look at the claim. Right. What about Blitzball?
And he's good at it.
Finny can play Blitzball, and he is good at it. Look at the claim, right? No one was ever better adapted to sport than Finny was to Blitzball. What does he now start to do?
Talk about other.
Does that have anything to do with Blitzball?
No.
So that should tell you that, that should make you question Gene. Like, why are you doing that? And many other things, right? Many other things. Why are you doing that? What are the other things? And he will tell you, here's the list, right? With people, with others in our dormitory, the faculty. I thought we were talking about Blitzball, but now he's talking about people and others. This doesn't have to do with Blitzball now. Right? Certainly the faculty is not going to play Blitzball. This is not about Blitzball anymore. Right? So the list helps you know that. You're like, wow, he's now made that be big and huge beyond Blitzball. In fact, if you stop to think about it, Finny could shine, right? There's the image. So the repetition of the image. What else do I have to identify on here? Everyone, right? Twice because of the absolute. Everyone he met. Now, he says, I'm glad of that too. Simple, declarative statement. Like, I saw that right away, right? Like, it was just a game. I was glad of that too. Naturally. And I'm going to submit that naturally is a repetition, even though the words aren't repeated, but the concept is. Like, naturally is it emphasizes it, right? It underscores it. I was glad of that too. It's a way of saying, I was glad of that too, right? I mean, like, it really is emphasizing it or reinforcing it. And I'm like, why? Right? Why the need, right? He was my roommate and my best friend. Okay. What we've identified would be evidence that you can use. And there's a lot of it there because this is jam-packed. I mean, in about every line, something is identified, right? which you could feel free to copy, right, if you need to. I'm hoping that you are, because what I want is for you to write a new paragraph. Right, and within the new paragraph, I want you to like have the paragraph be in the situation, say what the situation is, pick the best word that you think that this evidence then supports, right? So what is the best tone word for that? Jean feels blank toward Finny, and then you're going to talk about your terms and your evidence, right, and the analysis of it, and that's kind of where the M&M chart comes in a little bit, okay? So before I go to the M&M chart, because that's like going to be the next thing that I want to talk about, I want to talk a little bit more about doing this kind of exercise. It's all with analysis, because all analysis is, at least in my class, right, in English class, is going to be breaking down what's in the text. Because when you're analyzing anything in science or whatever, I mean, it always means breaking down. But in English, it's going to be, I'm breaking down text to see how it is making meaning, right? And that's one of the essays that you're going to have to answer. It's so important as a measure of your learning that it's also the essay. I mean, there's an analysis essay when you're seniors too. So on the AP Lit exam, they have different essays, but the one thing that stays the same is, analyzing the literature, breaking it down, right? So there's an art and a skill to that, and I need, lids is your way, right, to figure it out. So you can see one thing on the surface, but then when you look at it more closely, you can see that other stuff is going on. So if you're asked something like, how does somebody feel, or what is somebody's attitude, or what's the tone that somebody's taking here, you can't just make an assumption. You have to really analyze, look at the text, right? Break it down. So here's how this analysis really kind of works. You get some kind of idea. This is kind of what I would call like the big camera move. You have some kind of idea about what something is. So then you go and you angle down, and then you look at the pixels of it, the little pieces, and you see, do I have evidence that supports what I just said it was, big picture? And if you find evidence that goes against that, then when you come back up, you have to adjust your picture. So it's like, I might think that he feels blank, right? I'm going to go down here and I'm going to see if I find anything that supports that. And whatever I find, right, I have to pay attention to. And if I find things that don't support that, then I have to adjust this. And it's basically that whole process. I've got big picture, then I'm going to scoop it and look. Then I'm going to go like, okay, so now that changes my picture. And now I'm going to scoop it and look. Does that add to my picture, right? So back and forth, basically until you're done. So we went all the way through the text. And hopefully that should point to something, right? Any questions about it? No questions. Okay. All right. So, and the other thing that's on Google Classroom is talking about the M&M chart. Yeah, okay. Right. So I think I've done, so I say, let your first sentence be this. In the whatever situation, you're going to name the situation, Jean feels, and you're coming up with a tone word or words toward Finny. And then the rest of your sentences, more or less, would follow this format. The whatever, right? Repetition of, right. The rhetorical questions of blah, 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 right? Show, reveal, indicate. So what that is going to be is analysis or commentary that would explain how it proves or supports the tone words that you just said. So I'm going to share with you a couple of what I've done to give you an idea of how that looks. In a minute here, right? Let me look for it for